And welcome to yet another Talk Within the Nine-Sided Circle, brought to you from beautiful downtown Oakland, California, to the rest of the world by the Nine-Sided Circle, a division of No Such Tariqa. And tonight we're going to talk about a Sufi story, because we like Sufi stories. Sufi stories are fun. But before we do that, let me ask you, if you are watching this on YouTube and you have not subscribed to our channel, to please subscribe to our channel and to press the alert bell, which is now back. It was gone, then it's back. Yeah, it's back now. Maybe it's gone again, but it was back the last time I looked. So press that alert bell, because that means that you will be notified every time we put up new content, which is, at least once a week. And we know that you wouldn't want to miss it. And if you like the video, hit the like button, hit the old thumbs up. If you hated the video, hit the thumbs down, because we value your feedback either way. So, with no further ado, we are going to spring right into this story. I call this story the fine print, the cautionary tale for seekers. And it goes like this. Once there was a man who desired eternal life beyond all else. His name was Salim, and there came a day in his life when he realized that he was going to die. Before, he had a sort of vague intellectual idea about his own death. But on that day, it was driven home to him that there was going to be a day when he would not exist. He was walking down the main street of his town. It was not much of a town. The streets were dirt with ruts from the wheels of carts and wagons that had passed during the last rain. But it was a good town, as towns went. On this day, as Salim was walking, a cart came speeding around the corner, and just as one of the numerous stray dogs was crossing the street, the cart's wheel struck the dog with a sound like a club slamming into a watermelon. The dog was thrown through the air, and it landed right at Salim's feet. The dog looked up at Salim, took one bubbling breath, shuddered, and died. Salim could see the light go out of the dog's eyes. He thought, that could have been me. Then it struck him. One day it will be me. And Salim's soul shuddered. Salim had a wife and a son. His wife was a young woman with large, dark eyes and black hair. She had a simple way about her. Salim went to her and told her, look, I know I'm going to die. I don't want to die. She tried to comfort him. She held up their son and said, all things die, my husband, but look at your son. Here is your immortality. But this held no comfort for Salim. After weeks of thinking over and over to himself, I'm going to die. One day I will not be. I cannot stand the thought. Salim left his wife and son. He left the town where he had been born and where he had grown to manhood. He went in search of a way to escape death. Salim went to the city, to the places where the learned men live. He spoke with a poet. The man showed Salim his book and said, here is my immortality. If I speak my truth clearly enough, my words will endure. This gave Salim no comfort. A doctor told him, one day we will defeat death, but not today or tomorrow. A priest told him, obey my words and God will bring you back from the dead. But Salim did not want to go to death in the first place, so he turned his back on the priest. In his search, Salim began to hear of an old dervish who lived high in the mountains called the Spine of the World. It was whispered by the locals in the towns that nuzzled up against the foothills of the mountains that the old man was a sorcerer and had been alive in the time of their fathers' fathers' fathers, and that he knew many secrets, especially the secrets of life and death. So Salim set out to the mountains to find the old man. After many days of hard travel, Salim came up upon a camp. Sitting by the fire in front of a brush hut was an old man. Salim eased himself down by the fire and, reaching into his pack, pulled out a can of dates and a can of coffee, which he sat in front of the old man. The old man opened the can of dates and ate a few. He then offered the can to Salim. He didn't want to take it. Salim had heard that sugar is bad for health, and he was afraid. But Salim realized that he was even more afraid of this old man, so he took some dates and ate tentatively. Good, good, said the old man. Tell me, boy, why have you come here? So, starting hesitantly, Salim explained his feelings, his fears, how he had left his wife and child, his village, and his work to find the answer to his dilemma. He looked at the old man and said, "Please help me, I don't want to die." The old man sat and stared at Salim for a while. Then he said, "So, you have abandoned everyone and everything in the faint hope of finding immortality." "Yes," Salim replied. "You have abandoned the woman who you took to wife, your child, in hopes of living forever?" "Yes," Salim said. "You are willing to give up everything to escape death?" "Yes," Salim replied. Know this, boy, there are many paths to immortality, and the way we hunt it determines which path is the correct one in the end. The old man gazed into the fire for a time, then said to Salim, "Your hunt will demand much from you, but you are willing to leave everything, so this will not be a problem for you." The old man sat in silence again for a time, and then abruptly said, "For you, there is only one way now. You must find al-makan al-taviki fi al-dafadali." "The place where the frogs weep?" Salim asked. "Yes," the old man replied. "Far to the south is a rainforest. In the center of that is a swamp, and in the center of the swamp is what you seek. Now go," the old man said. "We will not see each other again." So Salim traveled south, and in every place he stopped, he asked after the place where the frogs weep. Sometimes he would get blank stares. Other times people would turn their faces from him and make the sign against the evil eye. Now and again he would be driven from a village. Finally, he came to a great rainforest. After several days' travel through the forest, he came to the swamp. After building a raft of reeds, he began to pull towards the center. Salim came to an island in the center of the swamp. He could see something at the island center, and slowly he approached it. It was an idol sitting on a pedestal. It was the most hideous thing that Salim had ever seen. It looked like some unholy marriage of toad and octopus. When Salim looked at it too long, his head swam. It was as if the tentacles of the thing did not exactly live in the spaces we know, but somehow twisted through them. Salim moved closer to the thing, and he saw that there was writing on the pedestal at the feet of the idol. Salim read it. "Kiss me, and you will live forever," was carved in large, crude script. "This is it," thought Salim. "Do I have the courage to do this thing?" Salim steeled himself and pressed his lips against the twisted mouth of the statue. It was like being struck by lightning. Salim's body twisted and writhed on the dank grass in front of the idol. Salim felt like his body was being cooked, rendered for tallow. He could feel something oozing from every pore. He realized through his agony that death was being cooked from him like so much rancid fat, and that his death was being absorbed into the ground in front of the idol. With that, Salim passed out from the pain. Salim woke up some time later. Things were different. He could not see well. His vision was fine from the sides, but he had trouble focusing directly forward. He thought he had been transported to another place. All around him were giant fronds, and in the front of him was a huge version of the idol. The one he had kissed had been about the size of a man. This one was several stories high. Salim saw that there was writing carved into the pedestal of this one as well, smaller and nearer the ground. He could not quite make it out. Salim tried to get up and walk over to see what it said, but his legs refused to work correctly. After a time, Salim crawled over to the enormous statue. He read the words carved into the stone. "You will be a frog, but you will live forever." And Salim wept. So that's the story. Thoughts?
Dave says Cthulhu wins.
Put a little thought into what you're trying to keep going.
Yeah.
Aaron says, reminds me of Highlander.
Of Highlander? You mean there can be only one? Chopping off heads?
Exactly, he says.
Zainab, what do you think?
Kind of sad.
It is kind of sad.
What feels sad about it to you? I mean, it is sad, but I'm curious what brings that up for you.
That's a good question. Not what you think of being immortal, a frog.
Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely goes to that whole idea of be careful what you ask for.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And be careful how you ask it. And it's not like this is a new theme. There was a Greek myth about this guy who wanted to live forever, and he got Zeus or somebody to grant him immortality, but he forgot to ask for eternal youth. So he just kept aging and aging and aging until finally all that was left of him was a little cricket.
Cricket.
Cricket. And of course, we have the portrait of Dorian Gray.
Yeah. And Dave adds, be careful your transmutation is not a mutation.
Yep. Or a transmorgification.
Yeah, this point about giving up everything is interesting.
Yeah. So what was interesting about that? That to me was also one of the most interesting parts of the story.
Mm-hmm. I mean, because there's on the one hand, there's that sense of abandonment and responsibility to me.
Yes.
And I feel like that's something that we hear these stories, and that doesn't necessarily get addressed in the story itself directly. Like the story about Siddhartha leaving his family and child and all that stuff to go through all these different phases of his development to become the Buddha. And meanwhile, I sit there thinking, yeah, but like, you just kind of, you know, all these responsibilities you just kind of dumped by the wayside.
Yep. Ditched his whole family.
Yeah. There's something weird about that. And yet there's so much we are asked to leave behind in sometimes literal and figurative ways when it comes to growing as human beings. So those are my thoughts. Aaron says, be careful that you don't misunderstand your true fear.
Yep.
I can't help wondering if the deal had been made explicit, what he would have said.
Yeah. Sneaky, these old dervishes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think the bit in the beginning, you know how he starts the whole journey from the fear of death. It speaks to the human condition. I mean, people think like that. I can remember when I was younger, like a teenager, I would have very hard time getting to sleep a lot of nights, even per week, just contemplating that. Whereas after doing work for a while, I almost never think of it. I wouldn't say that I'm completely over the fear of death at all, but I don't spend any time really thinking about it. I have other things to do, or important things, than to worry about that. But you can see how that impulse could be twisted and, as in the story, turn out quite horribly.
Mm-hmm. And so what do you think his fear of death was about? It kind of tells you in the story, but most people miss it the first time they think about it.
I guess jumping a little bit, it could be the fear of the death of the false self.
Pretty much, it's the fear of ego death, as he says in the story. One day I will not be. You know, it's the fear of the dissolution of the I.
I want to chime in with what Aaron said in response to Nancy's comment. Aaron says, I think he would have at least thought about it if the deal was clear. Yeah, I'm sure he would have. I mean, so many times we do jump into things not necessarily knowing what the fine print is on what we're getting ourselves into, and the consequences are fun.
Yep.
Yeah, well, part of it is he doesn't think about anything. He always goes with his first impulse.
Yes. And he spent the entirety of the story exactly doing that, not thinking about anything, not considering, not evaluating or examining. And he wasn't moving towards anything. He was moving away from something. This is also a major point of the story.
Bonnie says, not being, is that referred to as not being in a physical body or something else?
And it refers to not existing, not your consciousness being gone, your personality being gone. I mean, if somebody could have demonstrated to him, oh, you'll still be alive, you'll just be a ghost, you'll be floating around, but you'll still be you, he would have been okay. Because fundamentally, this story is about ego death and the extremes that some people will go to in order to avoid that. And I can tell you that in many long years as a teacher, I have seen this one over and over again. I've seen people come to use the Western metaphysical metaphor to the edge of the abyss, and rather than taking the leap across it, stopping there and digging their heels in and going, no, I don't want to go. Because to cross the abyss is to lose the self.
Aaron says, being erased from memory and posterity is worse than death for most people, he thinks.
Probably.
Yep.
Yeah, that's Achilles' choice. You all know Achilles' choice, right?
No.
Okay, Achilles, the Greek warlord, was basically given a choice to live a long life in relative obscurity, or to live a short life but have his name remembered forever. And he chose the latter of the two. And it must have worked, because we're still talking about him. Like 2,500 years later, we're still referring to Achilles and the Iliad and all of that kind of stuff. So he got what he wanted. But that's an interesting thing. And it's something that my buddy Steve Barnes wrote a novel with Larry Niven, I think it was one of the ones he did with Niven, called Achilles' Choice. And it was about world-class athletes. And basically, if you got to a certain level of skill as an athlete, you were allowed to take a treatment or a series of treatments with drugs that would bring you to the absolute peak of your abilities as an athlete. But it would take 20 years off your life. And the funny thing is, in interviewing athletes, most of them said that they would take the drug when they were interviewing athletes for the book. It's like, yeah, I'd take it. You know, give me something that would make me excel beyond everybody else and beyond anything that I can do now. 20 years is a good trade. What does that tell you?
It could be lack of imagination. I mean, you know, they're dying at 50, and, you know, at that point, what are they thinking about this choice?
Yeah, but then they might. Here's one thing I know about old athletes
Hmm.
is that oftentimes they live in the past because they can no longer achieve what they used to.
Hmm.
And for a lot of them, they go into depressions. Because their meaning, their personality is tied up in this ability to operate at this incredibly high level.
Yeah, Aaron mentions ego.
Yes, ego. Yeah, and
Oh,
ego and meaning.
oh, I do wonder how much of it is pleasure in doing the thing and how much is pleasure in being famous for doing the thing.
I think that there are equal parts of each.
Mhm.
But that would be a good thing to ask athletes. If you could be the best in the world and nobody would know, would that be okay with you? What do you think? You guys we have a bunch of athletes here.
I wonder if that goes just for athletes, you know?
Oh, I'm sure that it doesn't. It's just athletes are what I know some of the answers are.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And this sort of goes to Sun Tzu, to paraphrase something out of The Art of War. He says, the best generals are not the ones that win all the battles. They are the ones that act in such a way that the battles never take place in the first place.
Mhm.
And therefore live in relative obscurity because they have no fame.
Also, in a book of investment advice, I saw a thing that said, if you're thinking about making an investment, ask yourself, if only you and your accountant could know about this investment, would you still do it? You know, you don't get a chance to feel cool for winning, and everybody knows it.
That's an interesting thing to think
I never heard that, but that's my investment strategy to a T.
Hmm.
So, Aaron, when you say I think I would be cool with it, what's it? Just curious. I want to make sure I understand.
Being the best.
Okay. I think I would be. Okay. Being the best and no one knowing. You think you'd be okay with it, but that would be tested at times? Yeah.
David, you've been very quiet. Talk to us. Share with us your wisdom.
I think that for the athletes, it makes more sense that you'd be okay with being the best, but being in obscurity. But if you're an artist, I feel that you'd want to be able to share your art, and it'd be more meaningful to share it and you not be the best than to be the best and just have your artwork lying around you.
Yeah, that's an interesting one because there are a lot of artists that were arguably the best in their time and nobody saw their work while they were alive. I'm minded of a woman, a photographer, who we would have never known who she was, except that this guy found a trunk of undeveloped film at an estate sale or some such thing, and developed it. And it was these amazing pictures. And he searched out who this woman was and her life and everything. And she got herself a camera and was taking these amazing photographs of people, mostly around New York City, I think it was. And they were really powerful, and nobody ever knew. I mean, she never developed some of these roles, most of these roles. There were like hundreds of roles that she never even developed. And now, after she's dead, she's famous. Go figure.
So often that's been the story.
Yeah.
Aaron describes being the best in no one knowing like being Superman, but not always being able to handle the condition of being so.
Yeah.
And Nancy says these days an artist could distribute their work anonymously. It would be shared, but not connected to a name.
Yeah.
Well, that's happened somewhat in the past too, right? With pseudonyms, especially
Yep.
with women who took on masculine names to get their work distributed.
Well, I was thinking that if you distribute your art under a pseudonym, then that pseudonym becomes sort of a persona.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you just sort of hand it out and nobody even connects it to a continuing identity, that's yet another thing.
Okay, now let's take these ideas and relate them back to the story.
So I had the thought that, the fact that we mentioned that Salim wasn't really thinking, he was just kind of following his impulses and fears.
Mm-hmm.
If he had, because, like I said, it's the responsibility thing that struck me. And had he perhaps done some introspecting, he might have, for example, seen the value in thinking of his child as his wife said, a form of immortality.
Mm-hmm.
Was the ugliness of the statue a warning?
Could have been. Could very well have been.
It sounds like there's definitely something symbolic about that.
Yeah. And I do have to tell you that the story as I received it was pretty bare bones.
Mm.
And so, as you might have noticed, I fleshed it out a little bit just to make it more interesting to me.
Mm.
But that's how Sufi stories work.
I think the story is kind of cool as a metaphor for, I guess, doing the work and the myriad of spiritual paths within the 21st century.
Mm-hmm.
All interesting, colorful, and the kind of how do you cut through it all and find the true way when the true way may just be as humble as staying home and doing what you're already doing in a completely different way, rather than finding some statue to worship or whatever, or any metaphor like that. The fact that the journey was all colorful and interesting and all of that, rather than maybe if he had perceived something in the dervish rather than listening in the way that he did, he might have just gone back home and done something there.
Yeah, if he had realized that he had abandoned the things that were his responsibilities and the things that really mattered, then he wouldn't be sitting on a lily pad right now looking at the next million years of eating flies. And because if you think about it, the life of a frog is not a very interesting one. What does a frog do? He eats bugs. He sits, he croaks.
Says ribbit sometimes.
Says ribbit sometimes, yes. But he definitely doesn't get to be in movies like Kermit.
Nope.
And if you're an immortal frog, what happens if you get eaten by a heron? That would be unpleasant.
In theory, he could go home and support his family as a performing frog.
In theory.
That idea, but oh man. All
That
right.
reminds me of that old Warner Brothers cartoon with the singing frog.
Yeah.
Mhm. Oh, yeah.
Top
Yeah.
hat,
Yep.
cane. Yep.
Singing Ragtime Gal, but only for one person.
Yeah. Aaron says, seems he voluntarily put himself in a tragedy by way of his interpretation of death. Yeah.
Yes. That is a very good observation.
Yeah, I mean, that gets into the stories that we tell ourselves about the things that we feel and think. How we justify feelings that don't serve us and thoughts that don't serve us. By telling ourselves stories.
Yep. And by not knowing what is really a danger to us.
Mm.
Because as far as I can imagine, living immortal life as a frog, you can't even watch TV. So, what can you take home from this story? Nobody gets to leave until I get an answer from every one of you. Ah. Dave, what do you take home from this story?
I guess it's in line with what I said before, that one can do the work in one's own circumstance that one finds oneself in anyway. I mean, that's what Göçebe said.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the life that you find yourself in is the best for the work. It doesn't have to be some fascinatingly interesting, magical adventure. It can just be finding what you're meant to do and doing it whilst supporting family and all of the above.
Yes. David, what do you think?
We've got some comments too.
I
In the
think
chat.
definitely
Okay.
along the same lines. Definitely one thing for me is looking for something a little more interesting and something beyond the immediate people around me. So this story brings that back, brings me back to the fact that, like Dave just said, my life is definitely good enough for the work, and I don't have to go to China for knowledge necessarily physically.
Yeah, and this is something that people have been thinking about for a while. Did you know that the oldest complete song we have, music and lyrics, is called the Song of Sekelos. It was found on a Greek stele that was used as a tombstone, written by a fellow by the name of Sekelos for, I think, his wife. We assume it's for his wife who died. And the theme of it, as a matter of fact, I will post a link to the song in the forum so you can all hear it. But the theme of it is basically, while you're alive, live. Time is short. Enjoy life while you can, because it's going to wind down to an end. Funny says, can you read?
Zainab as well.
Okay.
Doing the work in the everyday life is really interesting. The adventures sometimes we look for are hidden in our everyday moments.
Yes.
Yes. Indeed. And Fani says, I find this story very interesting since fear of death seems to have been a thing for me for quite some years. I think I've mostly tried to suppress it, to be honest. I think that's true for many people.
Yep.
And Nancy suggests, find the right abyss. Made me laugh when
That is sage advice. And what does Kyle think?
What does Kyle think?
What does Kyle think?
I do think it's really important to see. I agree with Zainab that sure, we need to. It's kind of, you know, there's this tension for me, because I am thinking that it is good to move beyond what we know, what we're comfortable with, and at the same time to really dive deep into what's already going on in our lives, to learn what we can from that. So I don't think those two are mutually exclusive at all. Aaron says he's quoting Choose Life from the movie Trainspotting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a good reminder that lack of death is not life.
Right.
Just on that bit, I actually found at some point that death turned into a positive motivational force rather than some type of club being held above. It's just like, well, here I am. I'm still alive this day. What do I want to do with this life?
That's what was coming to my mind just now too. Yeah. It gives a vibrancy to things in a way. Zainab says it's very much related to the ego. The moments of life are adventures when the ego is pushed away. Yep.
Yeah. And I would like to suggest that every moment that you're awake, you're immortal.
Now there's a thought.
There is a thought.
Being asleep is death then.
Yes.
Kind of related to that, what would you, I guess, say in terms of, from your own life, seeing people who have dissolved the false I and are still incarnate, they're still alive in physical form, as being a type of, I guess, information that can help one orientate one's life.
Yeah, oftentimes those people become demonstrations. You know, this is how it's done. Especially, you know, the people who I've known who have done that, for the most part, have been people who are still completely engaged in life in one way or another.
I was going to say, it's kind of subtle, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I told you about the Buddha that I met behind the counter at the fast food joint on Route 66 in Slagman, Arizona. Y'all remember that story?
Head nods. Yep.
Yeah, good.
Some people do, some people don't.
Yeah, I'm not even going to tell you when I talked about it. You're going to have to go back and listen to all of my lectures in order to find that single one.
Aaron says, the place with the great burgers.
Yeah.
Eh.
That should be great in quotations.
But just imagine if Salim had met someone like that right from the get-go and been able to perceive something in that. The whole story would have been different.
Yes, but he would have had to have been able to see him.
Yeah.
I mean, in one sense, he probably absolutely did meet him when he was sitting with the old dervish.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, he could have asked him anything. Who knows what kind of wisdom that old man might have had. And you notice the questions that the old man asked him. Over and over again, making sure that he understood exactly what Salim had done, which is to run away from his life in order to try and find not dying.
Is it possible that Salim found sort of a false dervish?
It's possible, but I don't think so. I think Salim found karma more than anything else.
For abandoning everyone.
Yeah, for abandoning everyone and for abandoning his life.
Himself, in a sense.
Yeah.
Aaron says he was hunting for tigers.
Yep.
Fani asks, so what could have put him on another path if we could change the story? I think that's a good question, actually.
That's an excellent question.
Thank you for asking that.
Yeah. So funny. If you were Salim, what would have put you on a different path?
Good question, she says.
Yes. It is the best question. Feel free to put your mic on and answer it so you don't have to type.
I think that goes for anyone. I feel like anyone can respond if they'd like to. Oh, she says, I have some very loud construction work outside my window. Ugh, been there.
We understand how that works. So for all of you, if you were Salim, what would have changed the trajectory of your path? I mean, you can't walk up to Salim and go, you know what? Shut up. You're going to die. Get over it. That's not going to work. He couldn't find anything more important than his hope for immortality. So what could change that? I mean, even his own wife and child couldn't motivate him.
Zainab says, at any moment realizing that you need to change yourself.
Okay. And how could he have, what event could have transpired that would have given him that realization, do you think?
Aaron says, if someone was with him that had a different reaction, one slightly less fatalistic. When the dog died, I'm thinking.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that would have helped?
Nancy says, realizing that every step he's taken has made his life worse. If he sees that before he kisses the statue, it could have helped. And then Fani says, I'm still trying to figure out how I found this work, how I found and stayed training with Dave. Really? But you get along now, so that's good. Yeah. David says, maybe to change his path, he would need a dog that reminded him of the one that died. And in response to Aaron's remark of being with someone who had a different reaction, Aaron says it could possibly have changed the situation. He might have questioned his interpretation along the way.
Mm-hmm. So here's the real question. What would it take for you to make that change?
That's the real question, isn't it?
Yes, that is the real question.
Zainab suggests being honest with oneself.
How does one be honest with oneself? I'm always going to take those general questions and try and get them to be more specific.
Fani says, sometimes I feel that things happen at the right time when you're able to see.
Mm-hmm.
Dave says, well, he could do the classics like, does the fear of death occur in the deepest sleep, in all moments and at all times? Was it always there? When did it start and why?
Yeah.
Is that the neighbor?
Are you hearing the drumming?
Yeah.
Yep. He just randomly practices at whatever time. And he's getting louder because I've got like the windows closed and everything.
Ugh. So what were we thinking about? We were talking about what would we have to do in order to not get stuck in this trap?
Mm-hmm. What would move you out of this trap?
Yes.
Because the fact is, we're all stuck in it to some extent or another.
Let's specify the trap again, just so everyone.
The trap is death.
Death is the trap.
Death is the trap. And it's the one trap you can't get out of.
Fear of death, says Nancy. Are you being distracted?
I can't hardly hear what you're saying with all of that noise. I'm trying to figure out gasoline, dynamite.
Aaron says, asking yourself about what the things you fear mean and how much those fears are truly related to what you experience.
That could do it. One of the traditional ways of dealing with this is to contemplate your own death until you're comfortable with it. To imagine yourself dead in the grave.
So that completely gets rid of the idea of trying to like explain it or rationalize it away or dance around it. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's just the head-on, okay, death, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, the one thing that the human mind has real trouble with is contemplating its own extinction.
Mm. Nancy mentions a side thought, tentatively, not comparing myself to other people. This isn't directly related to death, but I think it's costing me a lot. So yeah, I mean, I can see if you mean like in terms of a parallel to the fear of literal death, being trapped in a kind of energy suck kind of death, of being asleep, yeah. Yep. It kind of gets back to the so what of facing things head on.
So, there to the sound of mediocre drumming, you have a Sufi story about death and immortality. And this story, believe it or not, is going to stick with you. And it's going to work on you a little bit. Because that's what it's designed to do. It's designed to get into your head. There are some stories, you hear them, and you never think about them again. There are some stories, you hear them, and you think about them a lot. 5 years from now, you might just sit up out in the middle of the night in bed and go, what about that stupid Celine? It could happen. So I would ask everybody, as you get thoughts on this, post them to the forum. It would be nice to have a little bit of an ongoing dialogue on this, because that's what stories like this are supposed to do. And that's why traditionally,
Dave says, you might wake up 5 years from now. I need to learn the drums.
could happen.
So yeah, I mean, let's see if we can, let it stew, chew on it, savor it a bit, see what comes up, and share it on the forum if you like.
Yeah. These things are called sohbets for a reason. Sohbet means conversation. Their value is in the dialogue, not in the monologue. All right, so you know what time it is now? It's time for a commercial break.
Yep.
So, let me see, what have we got to tell you? Yep, I've always got 1 or 2 slots open for private work. And I'm still running my I feel like a trading post now. Special. Yeah, my introductory special of 6 hours at half price. So if you know anybody who desperately needs to talk to somebody like me, send them my way. Or if you know somebody who you really don't like, you can send them my way and say, hey, talk to this guy, and I'll make them crazy for you. But yeah, the work is one-on-one to its greatest extent. First, it's one-on-one, then it's small groups, then it's large groups, then it's read a book. So there's that. The Enneagram of Personality course that we did is just about ready to be released, as is the 3 Forces and 6 Processes with all new material. Or some new material, not all new material. A little new material. And there you have it.
I think that's all we got for you this week.
That's all we got for you. That wasn't too painful. So I am going to stop the recording and bid you all good evening. So, good evening.